Hello, ladies. I hope you're doing well. I'm Lydia Ruth, and I am broadcasting from the guest room in the manse. And I would like to first of all share my teacup with you before I get started so I won't forget. I thought this went with the dress, and the fabric of this dress is from April Cornell. She used to sell a fabric line also, and I believe I got 2 pieces of it and made 2 dresses. And so, ladies, also, if you're new here, please click the link in the description box on the channel and go to the blog on which I have posted this so that you can see the descriptions and maybe a summarization of what I'm speaking of. The purpose of these broadcasts are to maybe keep you a little company, relieve some stress, I hope, and help you to enjoy your own home and your own realm. Now, I'm also a minister's wife, and I've been married 50 years, and a veteran homeschooler, and I will be homeschooling you because I can't help it. And you who are veteran homeschoolers know that. You're always looking for an opportunity, or it just becomes automatic after a while. We have been discussing I have, in the last couple of broadcasts, the source of stress and how to alleviate it and what to do with it. And I'm going to continue some of that today, but first, I want you to make sure that you're dressed. And of course, I am speaking of getting ready for your work in the house, at home. Now, I like to dress up even if I have a little outdoor work to do. You don't have to. And I do hang my clothes on the line in the summer. I water a few plants outside, do a little tidying up in the yard, but I like to be dressed and ready because I'm one of these people that has a, what is that called? Murphy's Law problem. And that is the day I decide that I'm not going to get cleaned up or get a shower or get ready, and I'm going to do a bunch of hard work first, is the day that everybody comes or the day I get caught out. But maybe it's not so with you. Everybody does their own thing, and just because I'm speaking doesn't mean I'm an authority on it. You're an authority on your own life. And so, but the main message is that because I have been speaking about stress, I just wanted to mention how having some clothes to wear at home and dressing up at home can alleviate some of the feelings of tenseness or melancholy or stress. And so in the old days, we would go and wash our face or fix our hair or maybe even change what we were wearing just because it gave us a fresh new start. And so I also want to read to you some things from Home Comforts. And I have already been out today doing a few things outdoors and going on my walk and looking at the morning. The morning sun is so different and apparently very beneficial. The sunrise is very important. The morning light, the morning air has good things in it. And you can look all that up. And I got to see the mist disappear, and I got to see the light in the morning, and it gave me so much peace. Of course, I understand you do have to renew your mind, and if you're used to thinking negatively, if you're used to thinking sour thoughts, if you're used to fear and dread, and you start in the morning doing that, it won't do you any good to do some of these things that I suggest. So the mind has to be prepared first. And God said in Philippians 4:8, which is one of our favorite verses, think on things that are true and lovely and good and virtuous and of good report, good reputation, and things that are noble. And you might want to look up that word noble because it means more than you think it does. And so that is a good way to start out. And you can, the Bible says God's mercies are new every morning. So you're allowed to forgive yourself, ask God to forgive you the night before, and the morning wake up to a fresh new start. You can actually become new in your mind, and there's no reason to carry on the previous day's burdens. If you've been doing that, that could be the source of some stress. However, I will be showing you from today's little message how stress has always been there, but we have not fortified ourselves with the things necessary to withstand it, because it's always been there throughout the generations. There's nothing new under the sun, and we have given up some of the things that have, or we've had things taken away from us, habits, beliefs, and understanding hidden from us that would help us with it. But today I'm going to begin with ironing, and it's from Cheryl Mendelssohn's book, Home Comforts. And I wanted to tell you, before I even opened the book, I thought I would iron a pile of, tea towels, dish towels. And these are the strong cotton types. They're not terry, fluffy towels. And I wanted to iron them because my daughter had given them to me on my last anniversary, and they've just been, and I could tell they were very high quality, and that she'd gone to a great deal of trouble to find them. And so I wanted to do them justice after I had brought them in from the line, and I wanted to press them. And they're so pretty, aren't they? Look what she's done. She's matched them all up to my colors. And I wanted to tell you while I was doing it how soothing and calming ironing is. So even if you had your family's, the dinner napkins, they were made out of linen, cloth of some kind, and after you brought them in from outside on the line, you press them, and sometimes the younger ones got that job. It was our first lesson in ironing. So why don't you try that? Just iron one cloth napkin, just because of the feeling of relief that it gives you from tension. I'm going to read to you what she says about ironing. Ironing gratifies the senses. The transformation of wrinkled, shapeless cloth into the smooth and gleaming folds of a familiar garment pleases the eye. The good scent of ironing is the most comfortable smell in the world, and the fingertips enjoy the changes in the fabrics from cold to warm, wet to dry, and rough to silky. There is nothing like keeping the hands busy in some familiar work to free the mind. And you can learn Italian while you iron, as a friend of mine did. You can simply think. Now, I thought of something while I was reading this to you, is that we used to have a bottle of water that was scented with something, and I don't remember what it was, but we sprayed the wrinkles out with that. And there are people today that have told me that the way they keep their iron from wearing out is they shut off the steam mechanism, and they simply spray everything with this water and from a spray bottle, and let the iron steam out the wrinkles that way. But they don't use the steam because they think that that is the part that usually causes the iron to break down. I don't know. I always use distilled water in it. Now they're saying on the booklet that comes with it, go ahead and just use tap water. But that could be the reason that they wear out so quickly, and then you have to buy a new one. But I wanted to treat you to this because she says, untreated cotton and linen woven fabrics almost always need ironing to look their best. And I don't know if she covered the part about how things became permanent press, but it's pretty awful. Things are permanent press because of the chemicals that were applied to the fabrics, so that they'd be permanent press, which hasn't been all that good for us. Not good for our skin, not good for our health. And so I try to buy cotton that is closer to natural. Plus, over time, when you wash things, that treatment will go out of the fabric and they will need ironing. And so she talks about the luxury of ironing. And she says you should not iron terry cloth towels and washcloths. And she talks about sprinkling clothes and linens, and how to use she has a illustration here, and I'll just tell you what it is. You take whatever it is, that is wrinkled, and you spray the water, or you dip your hand in water and you just sprinkle it on the cloth, and then you roll it, and then you stick it in your refrigerator. And I remember doing that in the olden days. So you roll the stacked napkins for sprinkling. I don't know if you would do it later, or it was important that they were cold, apparently. And so I wanted to read that to you, and that's in the ironing section of this. And I am going to go to Stormy O'Maratin and her book on Greater Health, God's Way. And the reason that I liked it so much, since we are talking about stress levels, I wanted to do this because she had divided the elements of health into many different things. I believe there were 7 things that she put in here, and it could be more. But she starts out with stress, and so because it's chapter 1 is peaceful living, that's very important to health, because with peaceful living and stress under good control, even if you are not in a situation where you can live physically healthful, you can at least have a relaxed mind and body. So I want to read to you about stress in here, and I did last time. Peaceful living. She talks about 95% of all illness is related to stress. And even if the illness is not caused by stress, it certainly is made worse by it. We've all seen people become ill after severe stress. And so I wanted to discuss that with you because stress has always been with us. There's nothing new under the sun. And particularly this idea and actuality that there's so much illness. And one of the things we had to stop talking about at the dinner table was illness. Everyone we know is complaining about some kind of malady, some kind of discomfort, some kind of illness. And if it's not a physical illness, it's a stress in their life. And so we had to put that aside because we needed to have some time away from the discussion of illness. And I even have got that going, I hope, in my ladies' class. However, you get together with other Christians and they feel that we should all be discussing everyone's problems and everyone's illness, and sometimes those who are more sensitive can be made ill by it. And I remember one lady telling me the church that she was in had a prayer list, and when someone needed prayer, they would call someone, and then they were on, it was called a phone list or a phone tree, and they would call the next person on the list, and that person was supposed to call the one after that, so that it could get around what the problem was, and that they should pray. But she said when it came her turn and someone called her, she couldn't call the next number because she just didn't want to repeat it, and she was so upset by it and so distressed by it. And sometimes I wonder what we are doing to ourselves. You know, we want to live right as homemakers and homeschoolers and have good character, and yet spread around all of our maladies, all of our illnesses. And I think sometimes we need to be more discreet about it, just in case there are people who have a sensitive nature and become more burdened by it. Like I said last time, some people are just slain by other people's problems, and it honestly puts them in bed because they worry so much about it. So sometimes we have to keep that talk rather quiet. So I want to read now from Brian Kozlowski's The Jane Austen Diet. I've read this to you many times, but every now and then I'll find something in here that I didn't remember reading. And this is about the mind-body connection, which is his last chapter, and called Health and Happiness. And how health is connected to happiness. And he talks about stress in Jane Austen's novels. You really don't think you see it, but when you see the 1995 series Pride and Prejudice, you can actually understand. They exaggerated it and turned it into more of a comedy. The way the mother took the bad news of one of her daughters running off with someone or something else, or maybe the fear that their daughters weren't going to have a place to live and that the estate was going to be given to a cousin and things like that. And she was quite distressed by it. Yes, I think we all live like that, don't we? Afraid that our husbands will lose their income, we'll lose our income, our homes will be taken away from us or condemned or something like that. So I want to read this section here that I marked here. And this talks about when Mrs. Bennet became so upset. Mrs. Bennet was really in a most pitiable state, and it was over financial anxiety. She said, "I am frightened out of my wits, and I have such tremblings and such flutterings all over me, such spasms in my side and pains in my head." Have you ever known anyone that exhibited those things? Yes, I have. Such beatings at my heart. Oh, my heart's bothering me. Yes, I know people like that, and I can get no rest by night nor by day. Yes, they'll tell you they're not sleeping. If that's not an accurate depiction of extreme stress and action, I don't know what is. So there was stress in those novels, and there's nothing new under the sun, so she's just expressing what happens to many people. Yet the idea that this was acceptable, nay, encouraged behavior was rampant throughout the late 18th century. Ever since Jane was young, stress itself was viewed as the right and prerogative of the rich and the well-off. The rest of us were supposed to just ignore it. The more stress you felt, the more you demonstrated to the world how truly delicate and sensitive your wealthy, soft-pampered self actually was. The common catchword for this was having a heightened sensibility, one of the most fashionable afflictions in England at the time. Mainly affecting the nerves, a Regency woman who caught this sensibility bug disdains to be strong-minded. She trembles at every breeze, faints at every peril, and yields to every assailant. Now, we're getting closer to our own attitude towards stress, aren't we? Austen knew real-life strutters of this sensibility, writing about one acquaintance who rather enjoys her spasms and nervousness and the consequence they give her. It meant you'd really come up in the world, apparently. It meant you were very delicate. It's the same sensibility Marianne wallows in throughout the novel that bears its name, feeding and encouraging her anxiety as a duty. It's like adrenaline, the drug of choice these days. Readers of the era would have found nothing out of the ordinary in Marianne's high-strung embrace of stress. What is extraordinary is Jane's response to it. "Do not give way to such gloomy thoughts." Who said that? Was it the brother of Mr. Bennet? Now, Jane didn't approve of it. Actually, she wrote about her life in her time and what it was like, and she didn't like it. Rather than taking the normal Regency stance, viewing stress as an innocent indulgence of the upper classes, letting Marianne enjoy her sensibility in peace, or allowing Mrs. Bennet her nervous tantrum in bed, Jane makes it repeatedly clear that stress is not to be trifled with. And I have a friend who had a bout with stress, and it just about killed her. So one day she decided she was having no more of it, and she was going along happily doing her responsibilities in life at home, and she got one of those stress attacks from some of her thoughts, and she said, "Oh no, we're not doing that today. We're not going there." And she just continued on her way. It's no random pattern that stress sickens, weakens, and incapacitates more bodies in her novels than anything else. And like I said before, whatever you're suffering from, and especially young girls, you should bury yourself in these. If you can't read the books and understand them, bury yourself in the movies, not the new ones, the ones before 1995 and before, or 1996 and before, but not the ones starting in the year 2000. They weren't as accurate. The ones before have more character study in them. So bury yourself in some of those. If you're suffering from stress, go somewhere in your house and just watch one of those movies. Marianne is the classic example. After being dumped by Willoughby, she stews for weeks in silent agony till her heart was so heavy that no further sadness could be gained, and this nourishment of grief was every day applied. Later, the severity and danger of her deadly illness is directly attributed to her many weeks of previous emotional stress, which Marianne's disappointment had brought on. Then again, she's just one of many stress-induced sufferers. And he goes on to talk about Jane Fairfax in Emma, anxiety ridden throughout most of the novel. The stress of constantly hiding her engagement to Frank Churchill soon manifests itself in severe headaches and nervous fever. Elsewhere in the novel, Mrs. Churchill, Frank's aunt, is one of those remarkably rare characters to actually die in the course of an Austen novel. And what kills her off? Stress. Her nerves were under continual irritation and suffering. Mrs. Bennet gets a sort of deathbed warning, too, being constantly in the fidget, suffering from chronic fears that her husband will die, leaving her homeless. And a far calmer Mr. Bennet wryly portends, "My dear, do not give way to such gloomy thoughts." So, we now know that stress should only be a quick, short-term sensation. Many animals benefit from the involuntary stress reaction. Its primary purpose has been to keep us and our ancestors alert and alive during life-threatening situations. It has to be used for the right thing, stopping normal bodily functions and diverting all energy into the things, the heart, the brain, and the limbs, that help us quickly avoid or surmount the danger. To use a period example, let's just say you'd feel more like running or fighting, nothing casual when being charged by Napoleon's infantry. When stress, however, is allowed to linger, when we replay those life battles in our brains and worry about other battles in the future, and I have said that sometimes retelling our story, our stressful concerns, the things that upset us and still are upsetting us that haven't been resolved yet, sometimes retelling it is not helpful at all. It's not as therapeutic as you would think. Sometimes it just brings on the more feelings of stress all over again. Our normal body functions are given the chronic cold shoulder. Crucial biological processes like healing, cell growth, proper digestion. Stress means you can't digest properly. And I remember growing up, it was severely disciplined table manners was you were not to say or do anything at the table that would ruin the atmosphere of peace, because our parents, even though we were pioneers on a homestead in Alaska, knew from their parents and their parents before how important this relationship with the family and food was. And today there are people that will not eat at a table with anyone because of the stress of the table, the stress that went on. And he said Austen was very wary of this sort of long-term stress. And remember, in a previous episode of Homemaking Radio, I talked about a doctor who said that stress was actually good for you and beneficial in some ways, but not prolonged stress. And he recommended the herbal tea. It wasn't lemon mint, it was lemon balm. And in fact, I made some, and it is very, very pale looking, almost looks like water, but it does. He says stop and drink a cup of this. But when you drink tea, ladies, don't just gulp it down like you're thirsty and it was a cup of cold water. Sip it very carefully and thoughtfully. Stop after each sip. Think about something, converse about something. You don't just gulp tea down. And that's another problem too, is the things that are made to soothe us, we often use in a stressful way. Austen's healthiest characters are always trying to limit the time frame of their stress, to be only vexed for a moment, not for days or for weeks. A stressful thought might be involuntary, says Eleanor, but I will not encourage it. So she wasn't nurturing it, she wasn't feeding it. And I heard about recently a woman whose one of her relatives was giving her a hard time, always doing something shocking, and then was telling her off and analyzing her and telling her how bad she was, erstwhile living a rather strange lifestyle. And so she said she developed this attitude of, okay, and so instead of saying whatever, when this woman would come around and talk to her and tell her something that she was going to do, instead of getting upset about it, she said, okay, and then she turned around and walked off. That's very biblical, because the Psalms and the Proverbs talk about the prudent man sees trouble and avoids it, walks past it, but the fool embroils himself in it. The real injurious nature of stress is how much it weakens our immune system. Maintaining a healthy immune system being another non-essential when you're running from a Napoleonic cannon. Chronic stress dramatically reduces our ability to fight everything from the common cold to cancer, impeding natural repair processes that defend us against viruses, tumors, and inflammation. And if you will look at the link that I provided in the previous text, previous post, or I might put another one on, it shows all the things that stress can do to your body, to its organs, and how dangerous it is. Astonishingly, 90% of all doctor's visits are connected with stress which causes inflammation. Over 200 years ago, Austen was reflecting these statistics with staggering accuracy. Most illnesses in Austen world have a corresponding nervous component. Emma recognizes a nervous part to her complaint when her friend Harriet suffers from a severe cold and sore throat. Coincidentally, Harriet has just spent the past few weeks in constant emotional flutter over Mr. Elton. In Mansfield Park, the stressful nugget of news that Maria has run off with Henry is enough to derail Fanny's immune system. She passed only from feelings of sickness to shudderings of horror, and from hot fits of fever to cold. One of the last characters Austen created, Arthur Parker in Sanditon, a man with more illnesses than you can count, has a hunch that they all point back to stress. I'm very nervous, he says. To say the truth, nerves are the worst part of my complaints, in my opinion. And he goes on to say, the injury of stress goes even deeper than that, damaging our bodies on a genetic level. Now, you can understand why the scriptures say, the Holy Spirit speaks to us through the scriptures, that we are to fret not, it only causes harm. I believe that's in the Psalms. And also in the New Testament, it says, be not anxious. And there has to be a reason for it. If we knew the danger of it, if we knew what the poison it was putting in us was. And so we have to investigate this. And I have a few things I want to talk to you about it that I found out. The ends of our tightly woven chromosomes, capped by a protective telomere, the genetic equivalent to the hard tip on a shoelace string, are particularly sensitive to stress. And he talks more about it in her novels. Marianne proves an even bigger warning on the aging effects of stress. Starting the novel, a brilliant, vibrantly beautiful girl. In the beginning, she's a vibrantly beautiful girl. Her later Willoughby-induced stress takes its physical toll. Stress affected every feature, giving her a hollow eye and sickly skin. And the brother-in-law says, "Poor Marianne. You would not think it, perhaps, but she was remarkably handsome a few months ago, quite as handsome as Eleanor. Now you will see it is all gone." In the movie, I think that he said she will lose her bloom because of this sadness. So there's much more to be read about this, but I don't want to use up the time too much because I have a couple more things I want to discuss with you. And number one is one of our family's favorite verses was Ecclesiastes 10 or 12, verse 1. And my children, when they were teenagers, just sifted this and pondered on it and took it apart and emphasized it and tried to understand it. "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come," and some of the versions say hard times come, "and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them." Now, most of the things that we do to buffer ourselves for stress that we don't know is coming are things that we learned in our childhood. We learned to sing. We learned to laugh. We learned to smile. We learned to be creative. We learn the therapy of water, whether it's playing in it. Remember when we first learned to wash dishes, how much we wanted to stay there and pour the water into one vessel and into another, and just these therapeutic things, which of course machines do for us now. But have you ever thought about washing a few things by hand on purpose, or washing a garment of clothing by hand on purpose? Nothing stressful, just enough to give you that therapy. And there are many things that we do in our youth. We told stories. We sat and listened to someone read to us. Or when we learned to read, we would read aloud. As we grew older, we wrote letters. And I'm thinking of all the things that we used to do when we were carefree. And I mentioned skipping. And I'm learning to skip again because that was one of the things. But it says, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the hard times come, when you will say, I have no more pleasure in them." What happens in your youth is you are building things in you that will fortify you for these hard times. And you'll realize that although the life is full of responsibilities as you get older, you still have those things that you can use to create a fortress for you. And so I had a thought about that one thing that the public schools do is they steal our childhood from us and they trade it with their agenda. This is what you're going to learn in your youth. This is what you're going to, they're going to guide you in a different kind of youth, which is not carefree at all. Or if it is carefree, it's irresponsible. And so one thing that we learn in our youth is we learn to relax and to rest and not to be in a hurry. And that's one of the beautiful things of being home or homeschooling, is that no one is in any particular hurry, I hope. And so in order to be kind to yourself and to buffer yourself for the stress and create a barrier to the stress. Now, the stress has always been there. Even when I was growing up, there was tremendous stress. But our parents were not affected by it as people are today. They weren't slain by it. The people that were slain by stress, even back in the olden days, did not have a strong faith in God, did not have a reliance on God. And we say we have a great God and we ask Him to take care of it. But then we don't let go and let Him take care of it. We have to make sure that it gets done the way we want it done. And start spreading the stress around. And I got to thinking about that phrase, "Don't air your dirty laundry," that the Victorians had. They were quite insistent on that, and wondering about what some of the underlying reasons for it were. And one of it was because they held the family and marriage in high esteem. And if you said, my uncle just ran off with somebody else's wife, or my cousin's daughter joined the circus, or something like that, you showed the failure of this family that everyone believed was to be held in high esteem. You just showed how it was breaking down. And so they didn't spread this stuff because the family was to be held in high esteem. It's like if you had a product and one or two things in this product, which was very successful, were flawed, you wouldn't want it spread around, would you? And also, it's like when some of you ladies, when you get up in the morning and you wash your face and you put some kind of a lotion or cream on your skin, it's a barrier for the elements. Or if you wear makeup, it is a barrier for the makeup in case. And also, I know some people use natural oils like castor oil and coconut oil or almond oil or something like that. It's a barrier. And so what we need is to have a barrier, to have like a fortress around us, a spiritual fortress around it, so that things won't knock us over. And so someone told me recently, just keep reading the scriptures until you feel better. And the more you read the scriptures, you might not feel better right away. Your knowledge will increase, your wisdom will increase, and your sense of security will increase. Also, I'd like to say that to fortify yourself with the good things that I've been talking about. A caregiver I know that she's in the caregiving business, and she says they have to, as caregivers, do a certain amount of personal care so that their bodies are restored. They have to have good nutrition. They have to have some kind of a exercise program, even if it's just a small, easygoing stretch in a chair. And they have to have some kind of good reading material, relaxing movies. They have to, they go like 2 weeks on and 1 week off or something like that. And they have to be restored. They have to restore their minds. And even Christ would get away from the crowd or be seen by himself somewhere, waiting for his disciples to come. And so it's very important not to be a harsh taskmaster over yourself, because as homemakers, we decide our list and what we're going to do. And if you start feeling the least bit tense over it, and it starts to wear you down or worry you, it's maybe time to stop and participate in some of the where you edify yourself, where you have the building back up. And edify means to build up or to improve the mind. And the mind controls a lot of what happens in your body. And so we also have to remember not to repeat too much bad news. And if you repeat too much bad news about your own life, you reveal a lot, and then people start judging you, and then they may say something critical, and then you've got more stress. So the best thing you to do is engage in what I called light conversation. This formal little light conversation that has no depth and no meaning. Hello, how are you? And how's everything going here? And just, I haven't seen you in a while, and it's good to see you. And just this light conversation. It really does warm the heart when you think of it. We gave it up decades ago because people thought it was trivial, it wasn't meaningful, and that it might be rather shallow, or putting on of airs, but now we're starting to see how important it is, because it also, if you can keep up a little bit of light conversation, it keeps you out of trouble, because it keeps you from revealing too much. And it keeps, often, I heard a lady say to me, I was just being conversational, and all I said was, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just can't get started in the morning. It just kind of takes me all morning to get ready for the day. And she said, my friend said, well, you shouldn't bother to try to get ready for the day. Just get started. Just start sweeping and washing dishes. And she said it just knocked me over to hear her say that, because I was just talking and probably thought she should say, yes, I understand, that happens to me too. But if you didn't reveal things like that, even though they're totally innocent, they can't ruin your reputation, every little bit of stress that is heaped upon you, there would be so much less if we would put a seal on our lips and participate in this nice conversation. Little children just love it. How are you, darling? You look so nice. I'm so glad you're here. Would you like a cup of tea? And, you wouldn't burden a child with some of these things. And so let's just think about that a little bit, how much we reveal that actually brings more stress back on ourselves, okay? And sometimes even when you ask someone for support or prayer, you create more stress, because they don't limit it to support or prayer. They start to lecture you and boss you around and make you feel worse. And also complaining and revealing too much can cause stress. So stress will always be there, but let's not be the cause of it ourselves, because we can cause it to ourselves. But we need to have a fortress against it, just like oiling up your skin to protect you from the harsh elements. We need to put the oil of gladness on our hearts and maybe read as much as we can from the scriptures and see if it helps our mood. Now, the other day, I was starting to feel really tense over something, and it was just the enormous amount of stuff that I felt I had to do before there was a deadline of something else that was coming up that I had to be ready for. And I started to breathe more in a shallow way, and I felt the tension come up my back, and I said, well, it's time for a cup of tea. And anyone want to go for a walk with me? And we walked along the edge of the farmland with our tea and just enjoyed the sunlight, the feeling of it on our skin. And when I came back, my attitude had greatly improved. And now I'd like to read from you, and I'm sure you were all waiting for this. So get your cup of tea and come and listen. We're doing Wives and Daughters, and I found a chapter that I just love. And if you want to understand Wives and Daughters better, get the series, the BBC series, Wives and Daughters, and watch it carefully, pause it every now and then. If you're watching it with someone, what I enjoyed was I had a friend over that had not seen it, and so she wanted to see it and asked me if I had it. And we paused every now and then. I'll say, do you see what happened there? Do you see what's going on? Do you know what that means? And as a matter of fact, in North and South, which is not the American version of North and South, talking about the Civil War, the so-called Civil War. It was about the difference between the northern factories, cotton factories, and the southern way of life in London. And in the South, they had more of a knowledge of manners and practiced certain protocol. And when Mr. Thornton reached for Margaret's hand, she was aghast, and she didn't take his hand. And her father said, things are different here. I think Mr. Thornton was very, very hurt by your refusing to take his hand. And she said a gentleman would have known not to shake a lady's hand. A lady always offers her hand first. And she was right. But this was the difference between the North and the South. And there are many things to understand. And it's the same way here, too. I live up in the North now. I used to live in the South. There's a big difference. Things they do and say here, I would have once considered extremely harsh and rude, and in some instances still do. They have a habit of hasty, sharp replies before listening to a matter fully. and they're very snappish in the way that they speak back to you, and I just smile at them, and also tend to be more not quite as understanding, and they're just quick to judge, and so that's just the difference. And it could be to the lifestyle too, lots of hunting, fishing, and just heavy hard work, lumber, that sort of thing. And so, but speaking of lumber, there is a little area that I went to once where was a lumbering town, and so it has that look of industry and manufacturing. But there was a wife of a man that was involved with the lumber company, and they were allowed to live in a little house that I think one of the companies owned, and she just did wonders with that. She fixed it up. She put a little beautiful garden around it. It's just like a rose in the middle of weeds there, and she just did. You could tell there was a woman there because of what that house looked like. So I'm going to read a chapter, Molly Gibson at Hanley Hall. And so Roger has come home from one of his trips, one of his science trips, and he's home with his father. The week was nearly gone when one morning the squire found Roger sitting in the old library with a book before him, it is true, but so deep in thought that he was evidently startled by his father's unexpected entrance. "I thought I should find thee here, my lad. We'll have the old room done up again before winter. It smells musty enough, and yet I see it's the place for thee. I want thee to go with me around the 5-acre. I'm thinking of laying it down in grass. It's time for you to be getting into the fresh air. You look quite woebegone over books, books, books. There never was a thing like 'em for stealing a man's health out of him." So Roger went out with his father, without saying many words, till they were at some distance from the house. Then he brought out a sentence with such abruptness that he repaid his father for the start the latter had given him a quarter of an hour before. "Father, you remember I'm going out again to the Cape next month. You spoke of doing up the library. If it is for me, I shall be away all winter." "Can't you get it off?" pleaded his father. "I thought maybe you'd forgotten all about it." "Not likely," said Roger, half smiling. "Well, but they might have found another man to finish up your work." "No one can finish it but myself. Besides, an engagement is an engagement. When I wrote to Lord Hollingford to tell him I must come home, I promised to go out again for another 6 months. I know, and perhaps it will put it out of thy mind. It will always be hard on me to part from thee, but I dare say it's best for you." Roger's color deepened. You are alluding to, Miss Kirkpatrick. Mrs. Henderson, I mean. Father, let me tell you once and for all, I think that was rather a hasty affair. I'm pretty sure now that we were not suited to each other. I was wretched when I got her letter, at the Cape, I mean, but I believe it was for the best. "That's right, that's my own boy," said the squire, turning around and shaking hands with his son with vehemence. "And now I'll tell you what I heard the other day when I was at the magistrates' meeting. They were all saying she had jilted Preston. I don't want to hear anything against her. She may have her faults, but I can never forget how I once loved her." Well, perhaps it's right. I was not so bad about it, was I, Roger? Poor Osborne needn't have been so secret with me. I asked your Miss Cynthia out here, and her mother and all. My bark is worse than my bite, for if I had a wish on earth, it was to see Osborne married as befitted one of an old stock, and he went and chose out this French girl of no family and only a... Never mind what she was, look at what she is. I wonder you are not more taken with her humility and sweetness, father. I don't even call her pretty, said the squire uneasily, for he dreaded a repetition of the arguments which Roger has often used to make him give Aimée her proper due of affection and position. Now, your Miss Cynthia was pretty, I'll say that for her, the baggage. And to think that when you two lads flew right in your father's face and picked out girls below you in rank and family, you should neither one of you have set your fancies on my little Molly there. I dare say I should have been angry enough at the time, but that lassie would have found her way to my heart, as never this French lady nor the other one could have ever done. Roger did not answer. I don't see why you might not put up for her still. I'm humble enough now, and you're not heir as Osborne was, who married a servant maid. Don't you think you could turn your thoughts upon Molly Gibson, Roger? No, said Roger shortly. It's too late. Too late. Don't let us talk about it any more. Isn't this any more of my marrying? Isn't this the 5-acre field? And soon he was discussing the relative values of meadow, arable, and pasture land with his father, as heartily as if he had never known Molly or loved Cynthia. But the squire was not in such good spirits, and went but heavily into the discussion. But don't you think you could like her if you tried, Roger? Roger knew perfectly well to what his father was alluding, but for an instant he was on the point of pretending to misunderstand. At length, however, he did say, in a low voice, I shall never try, father. Don't let us talk about it any more. As I said before, it's too late. The squire was like a child to whom some toy had been refused. From time to time the thought of his disappointment in the matter recurred in his mind, and then he took to blaming Cynthia as the primary cause. So it happened that on Molly's last morning at the Hall, she received her first letter from Cynthia, Mrs. Henderson. It was just before breakfast time. Roger was out of doors. Aimée had not as yet come down. Molly was alone in the dining room, where the table was already laid. She had just finished reading her letter when the squire came in, and she immediately and joyfully told him what the morning had brought to her. But when she saw the squire's face, she could have bitten her tongue for having named Cynthia. He looked vexed and depressed. I wish I might never hear of her again. She's been the bane of my Roger. That's what she has. I haven't slept half the night, and it's all her fault. Why, there's my boy saying now he has no heart for ever marrying, poor lad. I wish it had been you, Molly, my lad had taken a fancy for. I told Roger so the other day. I said that for all you were beneath what I ever thought to see them marry. Well, it's of no use. It's too late now, he said. Only never let me hear that baggage's name again. That's all, and no offence to you either, lassie. I know you love the wench, but if you'll take an old man's word, you're worth a score of her. I wish young men would think so too, he muttered as he went to the side table to carve the ham, while Molly poured the tea. Her heart was very hot all the time, and effectually silenced for a space. It was with the greatest difficulty that she could keep tears from falling. She felt altogether in a wrong position in that house, which had been like a home to her until this last visit. What with Mrs. Goodenough's remarks, and now the speech of the squire's, implying, at least to her susceptible imagination, that his father had proposed her as a wife to his son Roger, and that she had been rejected, she was more glad than she could express or even think that she was going to go home that morning. Roger came in from his walk while she was taking in this state of feeling. He saw her in an instant that something had distressed Molly, and he longed to have the old friendly right of asking her what it was, but she had effectually kept him at too great a distance during the last few days for him to feel the liberty to speak to her in such a straightforward, brotherly way, especially now. It was all that he could do to make talk under these circumstances, but he backed up her efforts as well as he could until Aimée came down, grave and anxious. Look, Molly, said he, as he was on the point of leaving the room again and finding him there alone, I gathered these flowers for you before breakfast. He came to meet her reluctant advance. "Thank you," said she. "You are very kind. I'm very obliged to you." "Then you must do something for me," he said, determined not to notice the restraint in her manner. "Tell me honestly, as I know you will. Have I done something to vex you, since we were both so happy at the Towers together?" His voice was so kind and true, his manner so winning yet wistful, that Molly would have been thankful to tell him all. She believed that he could have helped her more than anyone to understand how she ought to behave rightly. "No, you never vexed me my whole life, Roger," she said. "I believe you because you say so. I have no right to ask further. Molly, will you give me back one of these flowers as a pledge of what you've said?" "Sure, take whatever you like." She eagerly offered him the nosegay to choose from. "No, you must choose and give it to me." Just then the squire came in. Roger would have been glad if Molly had not gone on so eagerly to ransack the bunch for the choicest flower. "Oh, please, Mr. Hamley, do you know which is Roger's favorite flower?" A rose, I dare say. The carriage is at the door, and Molly, my dear, I don't want to hurry you, but I know. Here, Roger, here's a rose. I will find Papa as soon as I ever get home." And so that reminded me, I had a little book on, I wonder what happened to it here. A little book about the language of flowers. Of course, in the era, many people were familiar with this, and I read it in Linda Lichter's book about how flowers all had a meaning, and you can kind of tell by their color. The white flowers have a feeling of peace. The blue flowers are more of a spiritual, heavenly, blue sky feeling. And the red is more powerful and pronounced. And so I'll just read to you a couple of the flowers, especially the rose, because it was the one that she handed Roger. Rose means love. The cabbage rose means ambassador of love. And the red and white roses together mean unity. And so there's many different. It has a whole list of flowers, and it's called. We might be able to. It's called A Bouquet of Flowers by Barbara Milo, and so it might still be available somewhere. I got it in I believe, 1990 was when it was published, and that was the year that I got it. So ladies, I hope that this has been beneficial to you in some way. I'm starting to come back a little bit more, but I never know. There's going to be some commotion around here the next couple of days, so I wanted to come as often as I could before the hard times come. And so in the meantime, practice some of the things that you liked to do that gave you peace back before the hard times came, and relive some of the things that you were taught when you were young. And what is youth? It is a time when we absorbed many ideas and beliefs. It's not too late to go back and do that some more, because if you got thrust into the world, you threw away your wonderful eagerness to know things and to understand and to learn things, and make sure that every day you learn something, and learn something that's good. And be careful of your thoughts. Guard your thoughts carefully. And let's see if you can find a way to have a fortress against the stress, which will always be there. And if you read Wives and Daughters, the stress was incredible. If you watch the videos of Wives and Daughters that were done in the 1990s, you'll see the tremendous stress that Molly was apparently always under. And Cynthia caused a lot of it. She was a very stressful person, but you see this stress. Another thing that people did regularly, and we have to distinguish between recovering from stress, alleviating stress, and preventing stress, and being a shield from stress. You have to distinguish all of that, because there's no use being unguarded and then having to tangle with stress. You have to always have some kind of a shield around you, and you might want to look that up in the scriptures and see what those shields would be. And don't wait until the stress comes to go and do all of the personal care and the things that relieve it. Be prepared ahead of time, and you will find you won't have to run away and do things that to quickly relieve it. And people that are under stress spend more money and do more things without plans and actually can cause more harm. So ladies, I hope that this has helped and that you will research yourself and find out the things that help you and just be a social scientist of yourself, and that you'll stay close to Christ and that you will meditate on the things of the scriptures as the prophet David said and as admonished in the New Testament. And so I love you, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.